Hey everyone, Ashley May and Nicole Russo here with the Daily Racing Forum, taking a look at one of the stakes races this Saturday out at Gulfstream Park. It's Florida Derby Day, which means a stacked card in terms of graded stakes races, ungraded stakes races, but the grade 2 Gulfstream Park Oaks is a main one on the card. It's race 9 of 14. As we take a look at the field here of 3-year-old fillies ready to square off the mile and a 16th distance, just a field of 7, but there's some interesting horses in here. And Nicole, we talked about it moments ago, sort of off camera, but the pace could be very, very interesting here.
The pace could be really interesting. And I was just saying, I think that if the Queen's MG and 5G both turn for home with a shot at the lead, I think we could see a very interesting stretch battle here.
Let's check out how our friends at Timeform view the pace in here, and they see 3 fillies maybe being part of the mix. We talked about the Queen's MG and 5G, but the other horse maybe being the 6 Cassiar, who I guess maybe from the standpoint of coming out of a 6.5, where this one was somewhat close to the action and then was able to get up in time, I could see that. I just wonder what the tactics will be, knowing that that filly has to stretch out in distance.
Well, that's the nail in the head, stretching out in distance and being so lightly raced against some of these with more stakes seasoning. I think they're not necessarily going to be looking for the same trip. I think they could say, hey, let's take her back. Let's let her relax a little around that first turn and see if we can save some of her punch.
And if the pace gets hot early, maybe a horse like the number 1 who has the LP late pace flag attached to her, Paradise City, can pick up the pieces late. We'll kick it off here with the 1 Paradise City. And speaking of her, take a look at her most recent performance, which was all the way back at the end of January. But it was nice to see her follow up a distant second place finish in the cash run behind 5G with this win, where the pace was quick. She was stretching out, though, from a mile to a mile and a 16th, which is an additional turn at Gulfstream Park, and she seemed to handle that beautifully.
Yeah, and she does look like she want to come from off the pace, as you mentioned, with our pace projector. For her sake, she should be glad that the field is not any bigger. Otherwise, I worry that she'd get a little bit buried from that rail position and need to work out a trip. But as things stand, I think she will be able to kind of get everything she wants pace-wise and trip-wise.
Her stablemate is the 2 Early On, who we saw not too long ago down at Colonial in the Virginia Oaks, where she was second. And it looked like she was going to get past Fondly. But I think when you look at it, it just became a battle of 2 fillies that were game. And I just think Fondly was better, was able to battle back and showed some grit. And I don't think this filly embarrassed herself by any means, but she will need to take a step forward off that 69 buyer.
Absolutely. And, you know, they're clearly aggressive on the prospect of earning Kentucky Oaks points and moving forward with this filly as she comes back a little quick, just a couple of weeks in another major points prep. And she is returning to the track that she broke her maiden, ran her best race on.
The 3, the Queen's MG, I guess, is the final stablemate of stablemates, as these 3 are all trained by Safi Joseph Jr. And she came off a very big win. We'll take a look at the Devona Dale, the prep race for this spot, the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And she has a little bit of a throwdown here. You can see Lacara's in there, who was coming off a pretty impressive win in the Suncoast. And when it came to battling, she just ends up drawing clear here by nearly 3 lengths. She gets a co-top buyer of an 80 in this performance. And I thought, for her, she really needed to prove that she could get a little added distance. She was able to stretch out to a mile, but now the question will be the additional turn.
Yeah, and I think we're going to find out a little bit more about her here. That mile race we talked about at the time was kind of a bridge for her, not the ultimate goal. Lacara, who ran second to her, a very nice filly, a multiple stakes winner, but she was not fully cranked up for that effort, as that was also a bridge for her to the Ashland Stakes, where we'll see her next week. That being said, I liked the effort for the Queen's MG. She was very accomplished early on as a 2-year-old in sprint races, and then sort of flattened out toward the end of the year. And I think it was a combination of the added distance at that point, or maybe just kind of having squeezed the lemon dry. She was good in the Forward Gale. She was better in the Devona Dale. We'll see if she can take another step forward here.
The 4 5G, this one for George Weaver, was second last time out in the Honeybee, and a game second for her. It was a similar story in terms of dirt races. She had never gone 2 turns. She went the mile at Gulfstream Park, where she was a dominant winner, as we mentioned, in front of Paradise City, but she had to stretch out and thought she held her own. And I wonder, Nicole, what your thoughts are, but I think obviously she has the early foot. She can go quick, she can hang around, but have to think now 2 consecutive routes could really be the key for her.
Yeah, and she's going to break running just to the outside of the Queen's MG, and that will force Irad Ortiz aboard the ladder to make some decisions early. 5G, another one, coming back to a track that she clearly likes, and she was a good second in the Honeybee to a very good filly. And I think, turning for home with Quietside making her move, 5G had every reason to sort of throw in the towel. And she didn't. She dug in. She gave a very good account of herself.
The 5, Whatintheliteral, will need to prove herself against some of these fillies, including the Queen's MG, who has finished in front of her several times. And I know they tried the race against the boys last time out and she was eased. I draw a line through it. I think, though, the issue I have is, okay, you can draw maybe a line through the Frizette as well, but you go back to the race 3 back, she was a good second, but a distant second. And I just think this is a big jump up in class for her.
Yeah, and I did like her a lot early on as a 2-year-old. I thought she was facing some nice horses in her early efforts, even her maiden efforts. Obviously won the Astoria despite taking some contact down the stretch. She's had some misadventures since then. The Schuylerville's another one you can draw a line through, as she lost the rider there. I think this is a nice filly. I think ultimately she's going to find her niche in the one-turn races.
The 6, Cassiar, will show this filly's debut, which came back on the preview day, the festival preview day down at Tampa Bay Derby. So a lot of horses use this day to prep for the Tampa Bay Derby. And in her case, we don't see her come back on Tampa Bay Derby weekend. But when we did see her race, her only start, she ran very well. She got an 81 by her speed figure. She was able to hold off a charge here from a couple of late runs from the 2nd and 3rd place finishes, or I should say those horses. And I kind of wonder with her, where she's going to go from here. Is she going to be able to handle the 2 turns? I think so. I mean, based on her pedigree, I'm not really concerned about that, but it's always a tall task. We've seen some fillies be able to do this year on the road to the Kentucky Oaks, where they have no problem doing so. And I have to say that figure does catch my eye.
Absolutely. A bold move off the debut win for these connections where, we talk a lot about Shug McGahee being a guy who develops a horse more conservatively. So I think this is a really interesting move. And I think it's interesting to see her pick up Dylan Davis, who, all through last year at some of the major meets at Saratoga, at Kentucky Downs, he was a story because he was really moving up his horses and holding his own in tough rider colonies. And I think he'll place her well and give her her best shot at it.
And then rounding out the field is the 7, Anna's Promise here for Carlos David. Claimed this one off of Dale Romans for $50,000, which was the race that she broke her maiden, which typically you don't necessarily want to do because you lose the condition. Hopefully they run second, right? You come back and win, but it didn't matter because they came back in a race, an allowance optional claiming event, and she did just that. And she also took a step forward in terms of figure. She went from a 76 to an 85. So a nice return for these connections right off the get-go. And she wasn't part of those top 3 in terms of the pace, Nicole, but those last 2 races she's been a part of, she's been close to the fractions early.
I could definitely see that, her coming over from the outside and having an advantageous position to press some of the others from the outside. A step forward in figures and a step forward in her ability to handle 2 turns for her new barn, where she seems to have settled right in.
Yeah, great point there about the 2 turns. She was stretching out from 7/8 to a mile and a 16th. So that's the field of 7 for the grade 2 Gulfstream Park Oaks. Remember, it's race 9 of 14 this Saturday down in Hallandale Beach. And it's time for our top picks here. And Nicole, very similar here. Top 3 cookie cutter order, 4, 3, 6. But the 5G comes off that second place in the Honeybee. And I think we have a similar thought that she could probably take a step forward going in a route once again.
Yeah, and for me, it did come down to 5G off a very good effort last out against some of the top fillies in the division, and the Queen's MG, who is very, very accomplished. As I said, I think 5G is going to break running, and the Honeybee, she just really impressed me with the stretch drive, refusing to cave, even though she had every reason to do so. I think the Queen's MG is going to challenge her down the lane, and she has the potential to dig and keep finding. And behind the top 2, I do feel this is a wide open race.
We are hopeful that 5G can get that 2-turn win on the dirt this Saturday, but also curious to see what the 3, the Queen's MG, and the 6, Cassiar, do around 2 turns, because they need to prove that for themselves. So 4, 3, 6, 2 for Nicole, 4, 3, 6, 1 for me. It is the Gulfstream Park Oaks this Saturday at Gulfstream. Good luck.